So we are encouraging Envirothon teams to really delve into tree inventories. And we are doing this through a activity called Teaching with iTree. It's a curriculum set from the Project Learning Tree. It's made up of 3 different activity parts. We are going to focus on activity 1, part A, that focuses on tree benefits, and then the entirety of activity 2. One thing that's important to note is I have very detailed instructions that we'll be sending out to advisors. Advisors, you are going to need to download the iTree curriculum onto your computer, and you do that through the Project Learning Tree website. And so we have instructions on how to do that. I will note that this activity correlates to the next generation science standards for middle and high school, as well as the Common Core English Language Arts standards, which is awesome. So activity 1, part A, delves into the benefits that trees provide, both in products and ecosystem services. It also begins the discussion on calculating a dollar value for those benefits. Products can easily have a monetary value attached to them, but how do we do this for things like watershed protection, carbon sequestration, or things like biodiversity? Once that discussion has taken place, we invite you to participate in activity number 2, focusing on tree value. In this activity, you will be inventorying the trees around your school. We encourage you to print an aerial map of your school and the surrounding area. We are looking to locate and identify 10 trees within your area. Mark each tree with a dot and a number, and later we will correlate those dots to a specific color according to their species. So we are going to really delve into more in tree identification. And since it's in February, I know a lot of trees don't have leaves on them right now. So at the end of this video, I'm going to have some common tree species listed and some of the things to look for when there aren't leaves on the tree. We can still identify trees in the winter. It's a little bit trickier, but the better you are at it, the better you're going to do at your competition. So each of you is going to be given a tree value worksheet. You're going to identify a minimum of trees, 10 trees in your allocated area. For each tree, you're going to assign a number and then collect information on that tree's species, the diameter at breast height, the circumference at 4.5 feet above the ground. We call 4.5 feet above the ground, that is DBH, or diameter at breast height. And this is, again, a measurement that foresters use to make our measurements consistent across the board. These can be gathered using a measuring tape. If you have a diameter tape on hand, that's great. Go ahead and use that. Or you could even use a string and measure that as well, and then do a little bit of math with that. We're also going to look at condition of the tree. So how does that tree look? How's the canopy? Is there damage to the branches? Things like that. And more information on that is at the bottom of your tree value worksheet. And then we are also going to look at exposure to sunlight. Once we have that information, we are going to use an online tool that is called iTree Design. It is found at design.itreetools.org, and this program helps us to measure the benefits of those trees around our school. So in step 1, you are going to draw your school's structure. In step number 2, you're going to place the trees that you evaluated in the last part of your activity with that tree value worksheet. In there, you have to identify species, the diameter of your tree, the condition that it is in, and then exposure to sunlight. We're going to keep it with the US dollar for report currency. You can actually model the crown growth of your trees over a certain number of years. And so you can definitely click that button there at the bottom and see how big those trees are expected to get in their lifetime. One thing I will note is this program can get a little laggy, so just be patient with it. So once you have all of your trees inputted into your map, you can see here that around our building, we have kind of a different color zones of where trees would be desirable and where trees may not be as beneficial to our ecosystem benefits. So you're going to go to the bottom of that page and click Estimate Benefit, which is step 3. You want to set your years to 20 and then save your project before calculating. This is a really important part that I am emphasizing because it takes a lot of time to put this information in. Again, the program can be a little laggy sometimes. And so to best assure that you're going to be using your time effectively, make sure you save your project before you calculate. And then once you are done calculating, you're going to receive a screen that looks like this, which has the overall benefits of the trees that we have in our program. You can also click on the tabs to see how much stormwater reduction is happening, how much energy we are saving by the placement of the trees around our school, the air quality that is impacted, and then carbon sequestration. And you can see on the left-hand side, we have the current year. So how are these trees providing benefits to a dollar value this year in 2024? We can do it again in 20 years in 2044, the total for that span of time, and then you can do total to date as well. So you're going to use these tabs and this information to answer some questions that I have sent to your advisors as well. And then what you're going to do is follow all the instructions, answer all the questions that I have, and then submit your projects to me when you're done. I want to see that you guys are effectively using iTree, getting into it, seeing what kind of ecosystem benefits that we can have. And one thing that's really great about this is one of the questions asks you to plant 2 trees around your school. And this could even be a service learning project if you guys want to take it one step further and really plant trees that are going to benefit your schools. So I'm going to go into a couple trees that you can find in North Dakota. Again, you know, the competition's in the spring. There might not be leaves on the trees yet. And so if you really want to excel in tree identification at the state competition, I would say start looking at the bark, look at the twigs, look at the buds. And so we're going to do that today. First, I'm going to talk about the trees that have opposite leaves. So leaves that occur across from each other on the branch. This first one here is green ash. Again, this is one of the most common trees in North Dakota. Again, this is the tree that is susceptible to emerald ash borer, and we have a lot of them around our state. The thing to note about green ash bark is it has these almost diamond shapes within the bark itself. If you guys can see, it's got like a diamond here, diamond here. So the bark is very distinctive. I almost say if you don't know what the tree is, green ash is probably a safe bet just because there are quite a few of them around the state. Another thing to look at, when we have an opposite tree, you'll notice that the buds are all also opposite from each other on the twig. So you can see this bud here is right across from this bud, so we call that opposite. I like to say the green ash buds are very distinctive because they're this dark brown color. And especially the one that's the terminal bud at the end of this twig, it almost looks like the hoof of a deer. And so that's something that I really look for when I'm going to identify a tree in the winter. Another thing we can look at is seeds. And so these are the seeds of a green ash tree. They maintain on the tree through the winter. And so that could be another hint for you. Next, we're going to talk about our box elder tree. This is our other tree with a compound leaf. Green ash has compound in sets of 5 and 7. Our box elder trees have compound leaves in sets of 3 and 5. You'll notice that the bark is kind of, I like to say wonky, and I'll show you a picture of the whole tree form in a minute, but these are really great climbing trees. You can actually tap them and get maple syrup from them. And I've heard that this time of year, right now, with the weather being as it is, we're having really good sap flow. So if you have a box elder tree, tap it, you can get some maple syrup. The twigs are often green when they're new. You can see this one kind of has a greenish tint here, but one thing to note is that the buds are also opposite, and the buds are almost this silvery gray color. And if you look really closely, they almost have like this fuzziness aspect to them. And the twig here, you can see it's kind of got this gray color too that actually rubs off when you rub on the twig. And so those are the things I look for when I look at a box elder tree. And again, here is a picture of a box elder tree. Again, these, I like to call them wonky. The branches kind of just spread out and sprawl, and you can see they kind of twist and turn, and they're kind of gnarled. So they're really fun climbing trees. They are home to those box elder bugs, and they provide a lot of benefits to us here in North Dakota. Next, we have our maple. There's a number of different kinds of maples we can see in our community forest. The one I chose to look at is one of the more common ones. It's called silver maple. This tree is not native to North Dakota, but you'll notice the bark is kind of this pale white gray color. And a lot of times you can see that the bark gets flaked off and it almost has this orangish color to it. And so what I like to refer to silver maple bark, I like to call it calico, where it's kind of got a bunch of different colors within it. You can see it's almost a little flaky in how the pieces are on that bark. In this top photo, you can see that the twigs are almost this reddish color. The buds are a lot smaller than the green ash or the box elder, and they're this kind of this dark red color. And this time of year, if the weather continues to be as nice it is, you can almost see the flower buds start to emerge here. And I've seen that as early as February. And so we could easily see this if you're going out and doing your tree inventories this winter here. Again, that is an opposite tree. So the buds are going to be right across from each other on the branch. Next, we have our state tree. This is called the American elm. You'll notice these were once the more popular street tree in North Dakota here around Bismarck. You can see that we still have a lot of really beautiful elms lining our downtown boulevards, but a lot of them are getting taken out due to Dutch elm disease even still today. A lot of times you'll notice that there's kind of a black kind of crust that goes around in a band across our trunk of our tree. Those are often a management tool that we use to get rid of certain insects. You'll notice that the buds here are a little more elongated and they're kind of stacked on top of each other, I almost like to say. And you'll notice too, if we look at our twigs, you will very easily see, is this opposite? Is it alternate? And with the elm tree, it is alternating. So we have one here on the left. You go up a little bit farther and we have another here on the right. And you'll notice too, the form that the tree takes on is very evident in the winter. And so with our elm trees, they have this very distinctive, most often, very distinctive vase shape. So you can see it kind of flutes towards the bottom and then really expands towards the top. Elm trees often don't have one main leader because of that form. So this is that vase shape that we often see with our elm trees as they get bigger. Here we have our linden. This one is also called basswood. It is a native tree in North Dakota. We see these more in the southeastern part of the state natively. I like to say the bark is a little more smooth. You can see it does have ridges, but they're not quite as deep or as furrowed as other trees that we've seen already. Um, you'll notice that the buds are quite round and they often have this more distinctive reddish color. And with lindens, here's a picture of that leaf. Sometimes you will still see the fruiting structure left over in the winter season, kind of on the ground, or even attached to the tree sometimes. But with the linden, they have what's called columnar structure, and so they're kind of wider at the base, and they go very much to the tippy top, kind of creating this kind of like triangle shape. And it's very common to see a linden split and have multiple leaders as it gets bigger too. Next, we have our hackberry. This is a native tree in North Dakota. The thing that is most distinctive about a hackberry is the bark here. You can see it. I don't even know how to describe it well. It's got kind of these little knobbiness to them. It's very different from any other type of tree that we have here in North Dakota. You can see like they're kind of raised, but most of the other tree parts of the trunk is very smooth, but the bumpy parts are very isolated. You can see they kind of don't really touch each other all that much. And here we have the buds. You can see they're more of that round shape again, kind of getting this green color at the very tip of them. And again, since it's an alternating tree, it's very apparent that they are not across from each other on the branch. One thing you can see too is what we call a witch's broom, which is a bunch of little twigs kind of all clumped together looking like a witch's broom. Sometimes you will see that in the canopy of our hackberry trees as well. That's pretty common. Here we have our bur oak. Bur oaks are native to North Dakota as well. You can notice that the bark is very like deeply furrowed. You can see here. And then the buds here, again, are alternating. So they're not right across from each other on the branch. They're alternating up. But the bud itself has a lot of these little pieces that make up one little bud. And they're kind of this light brownish color. And I like to say with bur oak trees, their kind of silhouette against the skyline is almost fractal in nature. When you see the branches, you see they're big and then they get really, really like kind of almost looks like organic chemistry where you have very sharp angles to the branches. And so another thing we can notice is in some of our oak trees, especially in communities, we'll notice that the branches get what's called oak bullet gall. And it's these little brown circles that almost look like Cocoa Puffs that are just attached to the branches up in the canopy. Sometimes you will still see acorns at the base of the tree. So, one thing I always recommend is take a look at the ground around you, and you might get some clues. Old trees, or excuse me, all old tree leaves can still be present. With oak trees, a lot of species have what's called marcescence, which means the leaves persist, they stay on the tree. They just turn that kind of brownish color and then they just stick on the tree through the entirety of the winter. So, that could be another clue you could see. We got our cottonwood. Our cottonwood tree, this is a very important tree ecologically to our river systems, our riparian areas in North Dakota. These get very, very large. So don't be surprised if you see a really big tree, it is probably going to be a cottonwood. They have these really large furrows within their bark. You can see that on the right here. Very large furrows within their bark. See, the twigs are kind of this palish color. And then the buds are very distinctive for our cottonwoods. And I'm going to talk about another populous species here in just a minute. You'll notice they look a little bit similar, but with our cottonwood, they are going to be very large in size, almost the size of your thumb sometimes, a little bit smaller than that, but very, very large compared to other trees. They almost take on this green color, and sometimes they can have a stickiness to them as well. And one thing I like to point out with cottonwood trees is if you break off a twig or a branch, you'll notice that the pith or the very middle of your tree branch is going to be in the shape of a star. Our cottonwoods all have that. That has a lot of cultural significance to Native American and Indigenous communities in North Dakota. So, something I always like to touch on as well. Our aspen is our other populous genus. This is our quaking aspen. You will notice it has this kind of light pale color bark. It's almost like got a green tint to it sometimes, but this time of year, you may even see that the buds that look very similar to our cottonwood, they're usually a little bit more of like a brown color, but sometimes they will actually um, flower, and you can see these little kind of squirrel tail looking things on our twigs, and that would tell us it is an aspen tree. And then the last one, our deciduous tree that I'll talk about is our birch. This is a very popular landscape tree. People love the look of the white bark, the black lines on that white bark. You can see a lot of times when a branch has been removed, it almost looks like an eye on the bark. A lot of people will be confused between aspen and birch because they both have a very light colored bark, so it can get a little confusing. With our birch trees, sometimes that bark is so thin it even peels off and gives its name. You could use it as paper. That's what indigenous communities would use it for many times. And the thing that I like to highlight is that our birch trees often have these horizontal lines on both the bark and on the twigs. They're called lenticels. And it's just another way for the tree to exchange air in and out. And so you'll notice it's got a lot of these like horizontal lines going up on the white bark here. And then our twigs are actually going to be this darker color with those little lenticels on the bark itself, on the twigs. So we talked about deciduous trees. Here I have some coniferous trees we're going to talk about. I did a whole presentation on this last year on identifying different coniferous and deciduous trees. And since these do still have their needles or their leaves, is what we call them, on the tree this time of year, I'm not going to get too far into it. The first one I'll touch on is our pine tree. These are coniferous trees that have very long needles. They're often in bunches, connected together by what's called a fascicle. It's almost like a little piece of tape that holds the little bunch together. You can see those here attached at the twig. Um, our trees are going to have bunches of 2 or 3 usually. This is a picture of a ponderosa pine. And so those have a little bit longer needles. They have very hard cones. When you think of a pine cone, you're probably thinking of a ponderosa pine cone. As opposed to a spruce tree where the needles are individually attached to the twig. A lot of times they'll be really short, a lot shorter. They can be very sharp, whereas with the pine tree, they're a little more flexible. With our spruce trees, they're usually a little bit sharper. And you can see here's pictured a Colorado blue spruce cone. So this cone scales are actually a lot softer. They're not as hard, they're more flexible, and so the cones can give us some clues. The shape of the tree itself, you can see with our spruce. When you think of a Christmas tree, usually the spruce tree shape comes to mind. And then lastly, we have our juniper species. These have needles. They do maintain them throughout the year. They are called scaly as opposed to regular needles. You can see they're kind of scaly, look almost reptilian, like with their little scales. And then the cone structure for our juniper trees are actually these little berry-like structures. And so you'll see these very commonly out in the western part of the state over by the Badlands. I will give you some additional tips. I mentioned a couple of these, but look at the twigs and look at the branches for opposite versus alternate. That is going to really hone you in on a specific set of trees. The ones I have listed here are the most common ones I could think of in communities in North Dakota. That doesn't mean it's all encompassing. But those twigs and branches can give us a lot of clues. The bark can give us a lot of clues. Again, look on the ground for dead leaves, for seeds on the ground, things like that. And then again, watch the tree ID videos that I put together last year because they have a lot more information. They go into a lot further detail on these tree ID tips. Here are some resources that I thought I would throw in here. If you want to check out the North Dakota Tip Tool, the Tree Inventory and Planning Tool, we do have that website listed here. The iTree, iDesign link is right there. You will use that for your activity. And then I listed some resources for Tree ID in North Dakota. The Tree Selector tool from NDSU is a really great one. It highlights a lot of really common tree species, more in that urban and community forestry realm. I have our key leaf to common North Dakota trees and shrubs. That is a dichotomous key that we often use, especially when prepping for the competition. And then the North Dakota Tree Handbook is that third link listed there. That one has a lot of really good information if you like to read. And then if you get stumped or you run into a tricky one, we always have apps like iNaturalist, Leaf Snap, or Google Lens to really help us along. Technology's come a long way. It's a really good resource. I will say, try to do it on your own. Try to use a dichotomous key. And if you get stuck, those apps are there to help you. Thank you so much. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, but happy hunting. And I hope you guys get excited about doing a tree inventory.